innovate in practice. So welcome back to our channel, and we're really grateful to have Abhijit Thosar today with us. He is a product strategy and design leader at VMware, and he has experience in digital experience design and strategy in industry-leading organization and like Fortune 100 companies. He's currently leading the design and strategy for VMware's flagship cloud computing virtualization platform called vSphere. And we are so grateful to have you today.
Thanks, Mickey. Thanks for having me. It's my pleasure to be here with all of you.
Yeah. So I wanted to start out today, since we are in the US and in the Silicon Valley, one of the important things going on in the world right now that I didn't want to glance over is the protests happening and the call out towards against, violence against the Black community. And I kind of wanted to take the time to really acknowledge what's going on and show our club support for that as well. And bringing into this what we can offer with it, I wanted to start out by asking our guest, what are some ways that they feel that leaders in different organizations can really play a role in uplifting Black voices, in showing their support and solidarity with the Black community?
Absolutely, and such a great question, Mickey, and so relevant in what's happening around us today, right? I think it's a responsibility of every individual in an organization, not just the leader of the organization, to not to be a bystander in the situation, right? And make sure that your views and voice is openly expressed in supporting the inclusive culture, right? Not just in your own organization, but in general in the society, right? I think it's extremely important for all of us to acknowledge the act that has happened and stand by your peers, your colleagues, members of your community, and members of your society to kind of really support and show your solidarity with them.
Mm-hmm.
I think as a leader, it's extremely important that you communicate, over communicate at this point in time with your employees globally, because I think at different levels of degree, each and every one of us is getting impacted and will get impacted if this continues. So it's extremely important for all of us to for the leader to communicate with the employees and also the employees to kind of voice their concerns and their views. So that's definitely number one. Second thing I would definitely strongly recommend is to sensitize yourself to what's happening around you, making sure that you are aware of any kind of conscious unconscious biases that you may have, and make sure that they are not coming in a way of your way of doing things and thinking. So those are some of the important things I strongly advocate. I also talk to my daughter, who's 14-year-old, and we talk openly about what all of this really means, for especially for people of color, as well as people who have kind of immigrated in this country, and have been contributing to the growth. So I think it's important for all of us to kind of just have a more open dialogue about all of this.
Yeah, I feel like the open dialogue is kind of the whole premise of these talks that we're having with leaders. Our goal is to promote the ideas of design thinking, but those can be applied in so many different ways. They can be applied in product innovation, but they can also be applied in HR or in solving problems that are specific to like the Black community as well. So kind of transitioning from that into understanding how can different organizations really respond to changing conditions. and in moments of stress. So, for example, we're seeing right now that a lot of organizations and companies are struggling with the coronavirus. And this crisis has really caused businesses to either become panicked and really have to shut down, or some have been able to keep pivoting, keep redefining their business model in a way that really works right now. What would you say is the way to respond to such changing conditions?
Yeah, I guess, I think every business of every size and scale is kind of getting impacted
Mm-hmm.
because of this pandemic, right? However, having seen and worked across different set of industries at different scales, what I've seen, and not just through this pandemic, but some of the other challenges that we have seen in early 2000 and then 2008, and now this pandemic, right? That is, if your business model is fundamentally sound before the event, before the crisis, your strategy may not change much based on the pandemic, right?
Mm-hmm.
I think definitely pandemic surely is a stress test for any business.
Mm.
Uh, but however, the companies, even if your strategy is not going to change or doesn't have to kind of change much, I think you definitely need to kind of go back and reprioritize your roadmap to address immediate customer needs and evolving market conditions. So, kind of having that sense of how do I kind of really change my approach to kind of still kind of execute to the strategy that you have articulated is very, very important. Now, what that means on the ground is that you need to kind of talk to your customers perhaps more than ever.
Mm-hmm.
Right? Many of your customers are going through a fundamental shift in their industry, and they are all ears for any advice and help. And it's a great opportunity to kind of work collaboratively with your customers to solve their immediate needs and help them out of this crisis.
Mm-hmm.
uh, as the saying goes, right, a friend in need is a friend indeed. Right, this is more so relevant now, where it's important that you become partners and ally with your customers and not have a transactional relationship with your customers. It's also a great opportunity for many brands and companies and enterprises to really forge those deep relationships with the customers based on trust.
Mm-hmm.
I think that's really going to be the core of the strategy kind of going forward. And I think you can only thrive when your customers survive, right? So it's
Yeah.
extremely important for companies to make sure that they work with the customers to kind of get them through this crisis.
Mm-hmm.
It means that you may want to kind of pivot based on some of your offerings and services that you have in the market. It may mean that you are kind of working out a different way of kind of collaborating with your customers. Some of your contracts may need to be relooked at, and all of that needs to kind of done in a very agile way, where you're constantly responding to what's happening with your customers, their organizations, and their industry.
Mm-hmm.
I'll give you some examples, right? And it's interesting to see how the pandemic has kind of prompted many companies to kind of prioritize their digital investments, right? A lot of digital investments before the pandemic, because everyone was in a hyper growth mode, were put in a customer facing or a market facing initiatives and programs. And suddenly now, after the pandemic, right, those digital investments are now spent on employee facing initiatives within the companies, in terms of how do you kind of really enable the employees to kind of work remotely. How do you kind of minimize the business disruptions? How do you digitize your operations, both the front office, middle office, back office? How are you kind of really looking at optimizing the cost of running business? Because right now cash is the king, right? You have to preserve cash to kind of survive this, because obviously the revenue is going to get hit, and your markets are shrinking. So how do you kind of really survive? And I think every company will have to iterate their business and operational model to adjust to this new normal. Organizational flexibility and agility in responding to that change is going to be the key differentiator in terms of who survives and who thrives.
Okay. Yeah, this conversation reminds me of both the importance of having relationships that you're fostering, as well as the importance of the flexibility.
Yeah.
Yeah, going from that, I guess one of the questions I have for you is about competitive advantage. Like you already said, one of the ways is flexibility is an important part of it. But beyond that, what do you notice in terms of the collaboration tools being used? A lot of businesses are being forced to work remotely. And within companies, the communication has really changed a little bit. The meetings that happened in different ways before, now, those are shifting. What are some best practices you're seeing in this collaborative way, or what are some that you're seeing are not working as well?
Sure. No, absolutely. I think it's interesting, right? And call it as a blessing in disguise, right? Because this whole pandemic has kind of really forced some of the companies to kind of accelerate adoption of digital collaboration, across the different industries. I think the challenges are more on the enterprise side than on the employee side, right? The companies are not prepared to kind of really facilitate such digital collaboration across their distributed workforce. We as employees and we as consumers were already using technology to kind of really collaborate, communicate, right, within our communities. So I think the challenges are definitely more on the enterprise side. Many industries who were just not ready to enable remote working, they are struggling, right? Their infrastructure did not support that kind of a flexibility and agility and scaling of such digital collaboration. I think in many cases it was also a matter of culture, right? To what extent you are trusting your employees to kind of work remotely. How are you kind of allowing them to kind of collaborate and communicate seamlessly, without having them to kind of come to the work, right? And that has become a big. I think the pandemic has kind of really opened up some of those obvious gaps and shortfalls and shortcomings in some of the strategies that companies have deployed. As you know, here in the Silicon Valley, many companies have invested heavily in real estate, really kind of building these fancy offices and office spaces where they expect employees to kind of come and spend probably 18 20 hours of their day. Now that has completely changed, right? And it's interesting, although it is very early to kind of really measure the impact of distant collaboration on the productivity and also the innovation, right? Because the innovation is one is the execution piece, the other one is the innovation piece, right? You can still be operationally very efficient and very productive using digital collaboration, but to what extent it impacts the innovation, right? And ability to kind of really come up with new ideas, and then kind of quickly iterate those ideas and scale those ideas based on the feedback. So I think we are still in early stages of to see how this entire digital collaboration is going to kind of pan out. But clearly, the companies who were already kind of working with the distributed teams, already had digital tools in place, they are finding it very easy to kind of rapidly scale and make it more enterprise grade of digital investment, right? Uh, I think some of the companies have also seen benefits of this, and they've already kind of thinking of making a permanent shift to working in this fashion. And we have seen that from recent announcements coming in from Twitter and now Google, right? And a lot of companies are kind of thinking about it. I remember one of my past employers, it was a large bank. It was very interesting to see, how the bank has kind of really pivoted of working in a digital in a collaboration way, right? And very often the front office, some of the back office people don't have to be working at a branch or going to an office. I think the definition itself, definition of work itself, is going to change. I think the work is not going to be a place where you go, but it's something that you do, right? And I think that is going to be a fundamental shift. In terms of what makes it work, I think there is one key ingredient for this digital collaboration to work, and that is trust, right? trust between the enterprise and the employees, and the trust between the employees, right? In terms of really how they kind of collaborate, how they delegate, how they communicate with each other. I think that is going to be the key ingredient for such model to kind of succeed. And just like customers, right? You need to over communicate with your teams, and make sure that you're constantly aligned with the priorities, and you're constantly kind of coming together as a team. So I think those are some of the tools. To me, tools are just tools.
Mm-hmm.
It's really how you use the tools to effectively communicate and collaborate is the key.
Yeah, that was very well put. I think thinking about work as not a place to go, but something that you do is really the shift. I think that really captures what's going on right now for a lot of companies that are realizing now that we don't have this physical space, but the work's still happening, especially like you mentioned, the banks are really realizing that they can actually achieve most of their goals without necessarily needing that place to go. And it's interesting to think about in terms of innovation, like you said, there's still a lot to be known about how this is going to pan out. But do you personally think that this is sustainable for a lot of companies to be working remotely into the long term?
Yeah, so I don't know. I don't know whether it's going to be a sustainable, both from company's point of view as well as from employees' point of view, right?
Mm-hmm, yeah.
I think we as humans are extremely social animals,
Mm-hmm,
and we like to kind of meet people and work with people and see them face to face. So go have lunch or go have a walk or grab a drink,
mm-hmm,
right? I think at some point, although we obviously are, all of us are seeing benefits of working remotely,
mm-hmm,
and then of course the impact, the positive impact it has had on the environment because of less commute and less pollution and all of that, right?
mm-hmm,
And more quality time to spend with your family. I think in long run, I think we'll probably kind of settle into something in between. It's not going to be fully remote or fully on site or on prem. It's going to be balance of both. I think at some point we'll have to kind of figure out a right mix of actually going and spending time with the team and meeting customers, versus spending time on doing things which can be done from wherever you are. You don't have to be in an office. You can be in a cafe, or you can be sitting on your couch at home, right?
mm-hmm,
So I think that's going to be very critical, that we kind of figure out what's the right model. Obviously, it is not going to be easy for many industries which are heavily customer facing, right? Where you look at the restaurants and the food industry, right, airlines, retail. I think there are large part of our economy still kind of relies on that kind of a face to face and personal interaction in the physical spaces, and that will continue. I think that will come to some kind of normalcy, of course, with all the guide rails in place for the new social interactions. uh, I think earlier we see a vaccine to the situation, uh, the more likely we are going to kind of go back to closer to what we called as normal before COVID-19.
yeah, yeah. One of the things I wanted to talk about was a lot of our audience comes from different parts of organizations. So some are leaders and some are aspiring leaders. Um, and one of the questions that I've seen come up a lot is about finding a new position. So we are seeing really high numbers of individuals being laid off for a variety of different reasons, but mostly because of the coronavirus pandemic, right? And as these professionals kind of step towards their next position and finding the best fit for that, what advice would you give them in their search?
No, such a great question, so relevant, right? And it's really unfortunate to see such great talent being impacted by the pandemic.
Mm-hmm.
I have personally had talked to many of such individuals over the last few weeks. Uh, and my advice to those impacted has been two pronged. One is look at it as an opportunity to kind of really rethink and relook at what you want to do next as part of your next play and next career phase, right? The second is to kind of use this opportunity to kind of just network and kind of really reach out to a wider section of people and companies, right? And very often you will notice that the new opportunities actually come from not from your immediate sphere of a social or a professional circle, but it comes from the second or third degree of connections that you may have in a social setup. And this has been my personal experience, and I strongly recommend that to people, because sometimes it's an opportunity for you to kind of really take a small pause uh, in kind of running your day-to-day jobs and kind of really getting things done. Sometimes
Mhm.
you don't get a chance to kind of pause and think where you want to kind of head next, what's the directional changes that you want to kind of do to your career. uh, that's definitely number one. Third thing that I would recommend is really kind of investing in yourself, right? This is a good time for you to kind of really acquire a new set of skills, or perhaps kind of take a course that you always wanted to kind of take, and kind of retooling yourself in a sense that you're using this downtime, or you have that extra time at hand. That's something that you can invest in learning about new things which are going to be relevant for the next role that you want to kind of explore, or the next industry that you want to kind of explore.
Mhm.
I think so. Networking, retooling are definitely some of the things that I specifically advise people. It's also about externalizing what you have learned and what you have gained from your experience so far, right?
Mhm.
Very often when you're working full time, you don't have time to really reflect and share your reflections with the community,
Mhm.
right? And using this time to really kind of share your learnings and expertise with a wider audience, definitely it's a good way to kind of share your knowledge, and b, it also kind of gives you the visibility in the market, right? And so it definitely does a good thing for your own brand. And I strongly recommend people to kind of do that, saying that, hey, if you've worked on in at any of these awesome companies and have been adversely impacted, you still carry that wealth of knowledge and experience and expertise and
Mhm.
learnings, and you can kind of package it in a way that can help you as well as help the wider community.
I think that's really great advice for a lot of the people who are searching right now, to kind of take some time to reflect and think, um, and really use this time in the most productive of ways. My next question for you is kind of regarding strategic vision. Uh, One of the things that you are known for is your strategic vision, whether it's macro or micro scale, and for companies large and small. Um, Looking at that, I guess my question is, how do you reconcile the short-term vision and the long-term vision for a company? Especially in terms of design thinking, we're in the process of innovating um, and iterating throughout, but oftentimes it can feel like what is the long-term vision is getting lost, or maybe sometimes even the short-term vision is getting lost. How does one kind of balance both of those?
Yeah, I wish there was an easy answer to such a complex question, right?
Mm,
It is challenging because I think both the short term and long term framework itself got redefined over last 2 months,
yeah,
right?
right.
So I think, having said that, I think, like I said earlier, uh, you may want to kind of reprioritize your initiatives and your roadmap for your product and services,
Mm-hmm.
right? I strongly believe that having uh, you definitely need to should be focused on your long-term vision, which is where you kind of started. Because to be honest, uh, if you look at uh, in the large scheme of things, right? If you have been in the business and if you have a solid business model before the pandemic,
Mm-hmm.
there is really no reason for you to kind of scramble back to the drawing board and completely rethink about your strategy. Yes, of course, if you're a big airline industry like Delta or American Airlines, and you are going to get hugely impacted with this major disruption in your business, and you clearly see that it's going to take you several years to kind of really come back to where you were before the crisis. You definitely need to kind of really completely rethink about your strategy and your business model. However, if your business is something that you see that it's going to be not severely impacted, over next 18-24 month period, and if your product and services has got still a relevancy in the market, you may want to kind of just reprioritize your roadmap. In some cases, for example, especially for the product companies, I think it's a great opportunity for a lot of product companies to start focusing on their services side of their business. The customers are looking for services. They are not. They want to kind of focus on their own core competency of running their business and getting their business back on track. And they are looking for any kind of advice and help coming from the product companies to take care of some of the back end and some of the structural things that need to be done, right? So that they can focus on growing and sustaining their business while you can help them kind of continue to run their business, right?
Mm-hmm.
So I think those are really interesting opportunities for some of the companies to kind of really start thinking about, how are they kind of really looking at their product services kind of mix, and where they can kind of really extend their help to their clients in kind of really sustaining and then coming out of this situation quickly.
Awesome. My final question for you today, and thank you so much for all your answers, is what is one piece of advice or maybe one element that you think designers, especially young designers, might not be focusing on that you think they should be focused on? What is one element that you think is very crucial that is oftentimes the piece that is left out of the design process?
No, such a great question, and something that is very closer to my heart. Being started my journey as a designer, and I still consider myself as a designer. I think the first and foremost that I tell designers on my team and otherwise is to think end to end, think more holistically about the user and the customers, right? User experience or product design is not two dimensional. It's a very three dimensional. It's a very a holistic kind of an approach to designing products. So having that kind of an end-to-end view in terms of where the users are going to start, and what kind of an experiences that they go through, not just while interacting with your product, but in general interacting with the entire company, the various aspects of the company, right from the sales and marketing all the way to customer support and service. So all aspects of that their end-to-end journey is very, very critical, and designer needs to kind of have that kind of holistic understanding of that journey that the customers are going through. That's number one. The second thing that I often tell my designers to kind of really get a good understanding of the business, right?
Mm.
The why behind the what, right? So really kind of getting an understanding of how is the business, whatever product that they have been working on, how does that fit into the company's business model, right? How
Mm-hmm.
does the company make profit from selling that product, right? Who's buying that product? What's the value that we are promising to the customer, right? How is that value being realized, right? Is there a willingness to pay for that value? So having that understanding of how the product fits into the market and how that product makes money for the company is extremely critical for the designers to understand, and then kind of really look at how that strategy can be kind of brought down at a design strategy level, and then of course at a design execution level.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much for answers and insight. I'm sure a lot of our viewers will find this really, really valuable. And yeah, I just wanted to give you an opportunity to shout out any of the socials that you use that you would like us to highlight.
Thank you for having me. It's always wonderful to kind of talk to people. I hope your audience enjoys this conversation. Uh, I'm always available. You can find me on LinkedIn and you can find me on Twitter. My Twitter handle is Thosar. And you'll find me on LinkedIn. Just look up for Abhijit Thosar, and I guess there are not many of us with the same name. So you will find me. I'm based here in the Valley, and I work at VMware.
Awesome. Thank you so much. Thank you so much for joining us today, and thank you so much for all your answers.
Innovate in practice.